This video is on the Fujifilm X-T5 and the 50f1 and them being my favorite portrait lens setup. And what you'll be watching throughout the entire video is my last photo shoot down in the DC region when the cherry blossoms were blooming with my friend Rebecca. You may have seen her in a couple of my other videos, you may have seen her on my feed every now and then, but both of us collaborated quite a bit just to practice and refine our skill set and to try things out that you typically can't pull off in a paid environment. I think at some point in the future I'm going to do a video on the topic of TFP, but today we're going to talk about the 50f1 and the X-T5 combo, which again is my favorite portrait setup of all time, and I am including everything on the GFX system. I am including everything on the Canon RF system. Between the quality, the output, and the usability, and the shooting experience overall, which is a highly subjective part of this, but I really do enjoy it. This is it. This right here, this is my go-to combo for anything and everything, and the only camera that I bring with me socially anymore. The lens receives a lot of criticism, and undue criticism in my opinion, because it's a totally different lens from the 56-1.2, which is what it was compared to, and all reviewers were saying, well, why did they even release this? If you have that, it's practically the same. It isn't. The linear motors in this make it considerably faster and more accurate than any of the 56-1.2 iterations that it was constantly compared to. And on top of that, it handles chromatic aberrations and Loca considerably better than the 56-1.2, which it's worth mentioning, but at the same time, I've never had anyone in my entire life ever complain about that. So that's another thing that's worth noting. I only bring that up because Canon has that blue light refractive optics layer in some of their lenses, and it really is really good. I do shoot professionally on the Canon RF system nowadays too. Previously with Fuji, now Fuji is just my personal stuff. And before anyone goes about pro or non-pro, the reason why I don't shoot a Fuji professionally anymore is because for video, I need something with active cooling. When you're trying to do something a little more surgical, that blue light refractive optics layer that Canon has on their lenses, it really does help quite a bit because you're able to get that very clean, very sharp looking image that you don't really need for portraits or photos of people in general. And as you may know, a lot of us end up softening the skin quite a bit in post anyway, because all modern sensors are just incredibly sharp along with the glass that goes on top of them, and this is no exception. Righto, so I'm gonna play through this photo shoot while I'm talking, and I'll just yap my way through. Again, this is Rebecca Chen, a good friend of mine down in DC. I'm gonna put a link in the description to her profile on Instagram because she was a champ that day. It was one of the windiest days we've ever had. But the cherry blossoms, when they bloom, they're only there for like a week at most. We did get hit with another cold spell, so we had like 10 days, 12 days, but people typically do unfortunately come in and start picking the cherry blossoms apart. So really when you try to get the photo opportunities, you don't have a whole lot of time in the more popular areas. Here we're at the tail end of Haynes Point. For anyone who knows or frequents the area, Haynes Point is just a lot less crowded than the Tidal Basin, which is where all the photos, if you Google DC and cherry blossoms, all the photos you're gonna see are of the Tidal Basin. That was a really well-framed shot right there. But I feel like you just have a lot more opportunities and you don't feel as rushed when you're doing this in any of the other parks in DC. And Haynes Point, being right by the water, it's nice. It's calm. It's not easily accessible by car. It's actually much easier to get there by foot or by bike. And you can bet between all these shots, she was tossing on that jacket. I felt horrible, but what's great about building a relationship with someone through TFP on a regular basis is that you become familiar with each other's work and you know exactly how to pace your shoots. You know exactly what you're getting an end result. Although I will say that Rebecca is always down for experimental shoots, and we do have a couple that maybe didn't turn out as great. You know, they were great in theory, in execution they weren't the best, and that's what makes her great to work with, because if she needs something done, 1000% I am down, because she's always willing to experiment. And today the photos did come out great, as you can see in this shoot, but it was cold. It was a very cold, very windy day by the water, and with these strobes I definitely overexposed her skin a little bit. A lot of these shots are without the strobe, but it's kind of hard when you have just one strobe and a bunch of branches and stuff. You don't want to get too many shadows on a person's face. Probably could have lightened up that background a little bit. So we went for a slightly airier look. You can watch what's happening on screen, but I want to talk about this lens camera combo in particular. Now on the X-T3, which is the camera that was out when I first got this lens, the autofocus was really good. It was much better than it was on the 56-1.2, but it was still very clearly lacking. You guys know the running joke, Fujifilm and their bad autofocus. Because of the f1 aperture, it didn't really take much to miss focus. Sometimes you would have someone's like nose in focus and their eyes would be out of focus, or they would just step just a millimeter forward when you were taking a shot. And now with the X-T5 and even more so the XH2S, the X-T5's autofocus is really good. I'd say it's finally on par with Canon. I shoot on the Canon R5C's photo and video for my clients, and I would take my X-T5 with me for photos if I was rigging both of my R5Cs up for video work, oftentimes to shoot action. And when I say action, I mean it's more like lifting stuff, because the rolling shutter performance isn't exactly great on this. On the XH2S, it's phenomenal. It's infinitely better than the R5Cs, which when the R5 Mark IIs come out, I'm not touching those unless that's been fixed. And unfortunately for Fujifilm, the only reason I bring that up is because, you know, when someone's moving in frame and you have eye detect and subject tracking, Fuji would typically, like, unless you really fiddled around with the autofocus settings, it would eventually just start missing focus on the X-T3 and the X-T4. I heard the X-T4 was even worse, but I skipped that camera. But on the X-T5 and especially the XH2S, not a problem anymore. But similar to how Ford has that, Ford stands for Found on the Road Dead, or it just has a very bad reputation as a car manufacturer because of how horrible the Ford Pinto was, Fujifilm is still dealing with its reputation of neglecting their autofocus performance in past iterations of their cameras, even though nowadays it's pretty much just set it and forget it. Less so for video on this thing, but definitely on the XH2S. I've never touched a single setting, and it's my typical content camera. I am just trying a new setup here that I will be making a video on in the future because it's a lot cheaper. Files are smaller and they're easier to edit because they're only 8 bits, so the color isn't anything crazy. But keep an eye out for this video if you're someone who likes doing a lot of talking heads at their desk. Sony, everyone is fighting for second place. Sony autofocus, ever since I would say even the old point and shoot, the RX100 Mark V came out, everyone is just striving to get to that level because that's how good their autofocus is. They're years ahead of everyone else. Years and years and years ahead of everyone else. Everyone's playing catch up. And I would say that Fuji has finally gotten to the level of Canon. The R5 and the X-T5 have pretty similar hit rates. The XH2S has a better hit rate than my R5. Nobody pays me and I don't have any allegiance to any company. These are all tools to me, but factually speaking, the XH2S is a more reliable photo camera for me, especially when it comes to subject tracking in sports, than the R5C has been. You know, that's a substantial statement to make on the internet. I feel like if they released the XH2S with active cooling, I never would have invested in the Canon system, but well, that could also be a topic for another video. This lens in particular is the one that pushes the system to the limits. Again, f1, 75mm full frame equivalent focal length, not the traditional 85, but to me that's actually a good thing because I find myself in situations where I wish I had a little more space to move back, and that typically wasn't the case. If I want to increase subject magnification to some degree, I just take 2 steps up. I fill the frame at that point the same way I would with an 85mm. Before someone says in the comments that it's not exactly the same, these are very nuanced differences. I'm talking about real world experience, real world use for a lot of this stuff. We're not doing any charts. We're not like testing for corner sharpness. And in all honesty, when it comes to like lens tests, controversial opinion, but if you're focused on how sharp the corners are rather than what's going on in the center of your frame, I think we've lost the focus to a pretty large degree because most people are going to be looking at whatever's in the center of your frame, not in the far right corner. Why do I say the X-T5 instead of the XH2S? It's because of the 40 megapixels. And let me tell you something, it makes a pretty big difference. Let's get back to the shoot now. Now, I'm talking about the 40 megapixels. Why? Of course, Adobe just crashed. Adobe just crashed. I hate Adobe. I edited my last video in Resolve, but there are just some things I can't do in there yet. So I went back and I just finished this project, God, in Premiere, and it won't stop crashing. I think it's the 360 footage. You guys let me know, is the 360 footage that you're watching, the thing like where I'm showing you everything that's happening, is that worthwhile? Because I think that's what's crashing these videos. And I don't know if just the little screen recording of what I see in the camera is enough for you. Let me know in the comments below about that. And while I'm restarting Premiere for the 4th time in this video, go ahead and like and subscribe. I've got a couple of videos coming up. Everything's been shot. I'm just kind of putting it all together right now. God, where did we leave off? So going back to it, 40 megapixels. The Canon R5, the R5Cs, 45 megapixel, give you a ton of cropping options. The GFX 100 megapixels gives you a ton of cropping options and also amazing files to edit, but 40 megapixels in this tiny little thing here kind of removes the one big advantage that larger sensor cameras had, and that is that they had, you know, the 40, 50, 60 megapixel range. And having the raw files is one thing. Like I'm showing you on video how much you can crop in and how much detail, despite all the heavy editing I did on a lot of these for the colors and actually adding a lot of film grain because the initial images were just too sharp, shooting it at base ISO. Might be showing my age a little bit, but I do like a slightly softer image. And right now, I'm just playing the entire video. You can take a look at the screen recording throughout and see just exactly how accurate the autofocus was or how inaccurate it was. For the most part, it was at worst a beat behind her, but still there. Like that's if she was far enough and it was trying to focus in on her eye. It's sticky nowadays. I no longer have the problem that I used to have with the X-T5 where I had to check every other shot, make sure, am I nailing focus? Am I not nailing focus? Which, truth be told, was not a big problem for me with the X-T3 because I did know how to like adjust the autofocus settings, and I feel like a lot of people were used to good autofocus, specifically that of Sony and even Canon with the dual pixel autofocus. Those are just not even set it and forget it. It's just ready to go out of the box, and Fuji really didn't learn their lesson with that until their most recent iterations of all their cameras, even the GFX. You know what's funny is I thought I had some images here where I could show off the logo, like the green fringing, but I think that's maybe in another video where we had like really harsh lighting. For the record, really easy to edit out of there unless you have a lot of greens in frame that you don't want to reduce. But it's worth noting. It's worth noting just so you know what you're getting into if you do decide to invest in this system. Oh, and here is towards the end of the video where the model became the photographer and vice versa. I don't know if you can tell, but I do not pose at all. And just kind of to wrap things up, this wasn't exactly a technical evaluation of the camera. I think pretty much every camera and every lens these days, they're good. You can pick up pretty much anything and there's a pretty good chance you're gonna get the shots you want. There's a pretty good chance the autofocus is gonna be decent. There's a pretty good chance that the bokeh in the background is gonna be very creamy. Like updates to all these cameras and lenses have been very incremental for a few years now. This is a pretty significant one for Fujifilm where, again, I think they finally addressed their autofocus woes. I do have friends who shoot it who say that they still had some issues, it's still a step behind, but I've been shooting sports with the X-T3, both photo and video, and I've been doing that for like 4 or 5 years, and I feel like I've probably come across the worst issues any Fuji shooter possibly could. And if the X-T3 autofocus was what I still had today, what they still had in this setup, I still really wouldn't have a very big problem. Part of it's because eventually when you're shooting video, you do find yourself in manual focus quite a bit. And the camera is a tool. You have to learn how to use it. Each and every company, each and every camera has their own compromises, whether it's pricing, performance, heat dissipation, which is a huge one, and I think worth a video on its own in the future. You know, they're all compromises, and you have to decide what compromises are you willing to live with. The thing is, again, we're talking about compromise, but if I'm doing portraits, couldn't tell you what I'm compromising here. You've got dual slot recording, you have an incredible lens, you have good autofocus, even in the dark, by the way. You have a great EVF, great back screen, reasonable size. Let me actually show you a comparison. Hold on. So R5C, R5 is essentially this without the fan. This doesn't really add an extra weight. And here's the 85, and this is what I would say would be Canon's. Hold on, I got a little dust on this. Not gonna lie, it's been a while since I shot with this thing. There we go. Get one of these. It blows clean filtered air instead of using the thing that sucks up like air with the dust. And you probably won't come across that problem, but I shoot in a lot of gyms and there's like chalk and dust all over the place. Anyway. So this is the Canon 85 on the R5C. You know, this is, and the image, look, surgical tool. The images here are impeccable, but impeccable isn't really a characteristic that matters that much when it comes to portraits specifically. Again, a very subjective statement, but that's how I feel about it. But size-wise and weight-wise, I mean, let me actually switch it because this is shockingly heavy. I forgot how heavy this thing was. This is a pretty sizable difference. You know, it's a really big difference in size and weight. Camera weight never really bothered me, but size is where I found like there's a struggle, especially if it's hanging off the side of your body and you're trying to like climb somewhere or get between people. Weight is going to be whatever it is. But as you can see, this is possibly surgically one of the best on the market. And this is my baby here, which, you know, technically it has flaws, but you just saw a full photo shoot there. You're going to see 100 other photo shoots if I can figure out how to make a video out of them, mostly because this is my favorite combo to shoot with. So the size difference is fairly substantial. And I would say that the R5C and the 85 here is probably the smallest full frame competitor. The Nikon's pretty big, the Sonys are also really big, but everyone's 85 portrait lens nowadays is phenomenal. And again, 85 being that standard focal length for portraits. The 75 is a differentiator along with the size on the X-T5. Plus, I think it's considerably more aesthetically pleasing. I've never been stopped somewhere with a Fujifilm or prevented from entering a location because I had a pro camera on me. A lot of people think that it's an old film camera or some other little dinky camera, but if you walk in with something like this, you're gonna get stopped, especially if you're in a national park down in DC. I swear those guys think you're shooting a movie or something anytime you walk around with something larger than a kit lens. That's kind of the end of the video. I know I didn't really get technical in on this setup or anything, and part of it is because, like I said, I feel like everything is just good nowadays. Like, just pick something, pick like a camera system your friends have so you guys can share lenses, or pick what's cheap, pick what's on sale, pick what's easy to travel with. This is by far the easiest camera like ecosystem to travel with, period. And just go out and shoot. If this inspires you to go out and shoot, then I think it's a good buy. If the R5C or the R5 or whatever else inspires you to go out and shoot, then that's the good buy. They're all tools at the end of the day. My tie into Fujifilm was that when I did not have a lot of money and I was looking to go full-time on video and photo and like leave the corporate world behind and everything, I bought into the Fuji system with a pair of X-T3s and lenses and all that stuff, and it catapulted my career. It opened a lot of doors for me. So I do have an emotional attachment to the brand for that reason. That being said, all brands are corpse. I'll actually link a card to a video I did maybe like 2 months ago to kind of drive that point home. It wasn't very popular, but it was a very honest video. In case you had a hole burning in your pocket and you wanted to buy a new portrait setup, this is my personal recommendation these days, especially for someone who's looking for a good memory maker. Links in the description below. Stay tuned for more videos in the future. If there's anything in particular you want to see, also let me know in the comments below, and I'll catch you at the next one. I am definitely not shooting on a Canon, by the way.